getting us set up here. We are going to do a grammar lesson today. Aren't you excited?
Oh.
Sign off now, quick.
What?
All right. Let's
Grammar lesson.
One of my favorite.
All right, so let's get started here.
Okay, Katie.
Yes.
You ready? Marge is ready.
You're ready for the grammar. Well, before we do that,
Yeah.
we are going to start by talking about some of those journal questions. And I want to start with number one because I am very eager to see if any of you brought some baby pictures for me to look at.
Oh, I didn't know you wanted babies.
Baby pictures.
Or, younger pictures. So here's me.
On the Oh, gosh.
I can run and get one.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I'm about 2.5 in this picture, and I was being potty trained, and I decided that I was bored, and so I unrolled the entire roll of toilet paper onto the floor.
Oh, that's all toilet paper
Yes.
there.
Yeah. So
Oh, gosh.
And look at the blonde.
yes,
Here.
I was a very,
Yeah.
very light blondie with my little curls. Yes. So cute
And this
little
was
kid.
what, like 1987 or something?
About that. Can you tell from the turtleneck?
Yeah.
And I'm just guessing because I think the rest of us were pretty much adults.
We were doing the potty training. Oh, that's cool.
So
That's
I was thinking about this person and what I have in common with her. She still lived at the house where she went home from the hospital as a baby. Her parents were not divorced, and she made messes, which I still do. Kind of experimented with things and learned from mistakes.
Okay.
So I have that in common with her. My hair is darker. I'm obviously a little taller, a little bit, not too much. They say that your body regenerates all of its cells every 10 years. So in terms of the physical matter that I am made up of, I have nothing in common with this person. So it's interesting, to think about this.
Mhm.
Except
Now,
the DNA should be about the same.
Now, Katie, do you remember this time?
I do not know.
Okay.
No. But I was looking through pictures and I decided I had to show you this one. I thought it was funny.
Sweet.
Did anybody else bring us something to look at?
I did. I can try to hold it up to the camera. We'll see if it works.
Yeah, show it up, hold it up for us so we can see.
Oh, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like that.
That's
Oh, I've seen that picture.
Probably the same guy went around the entire
Yeah.
state with that darn little pony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was probably around 2.5, might be 3 when that happened. I was at my grandmother's house, and I shows up, and they throw me in the little chaps and the little cowboy outfit and load me up on that pony who knew how to pose exactly like he did. And of course, I'm light years away from there. That was down near San Diego. So I'm gone from there. Everybody involved with that picture is dead. Probably the horse too.
Probably.
Except I'm still here. back then I didn't have a thing about horses, but as I've grown up, I've had 2 horses try to kill me and had some real fun horse experiences. So I'm not a horse person anymore.
Woo!
I can deal with them, but I don't like them because they are evil at times. It's just I'm light years away from that. I like to have be adventurous and curiosity are still there, but definitely much more of a skeptic life. Back then it was the innocent days, and a stranger came to the house, nobody is like, oh, okay, well, let them take a picture and do this whole thing. Nowadays it'd be like, there's a dude at the door with a horse. So, but I'm not into the detail as Katie of knowing how many times my body's regenerated or anything like that. But yeah, so it's I remember him. I remember that life, and I think I've grown, and through my marriage with Pat, I'm a much better person than I would have been if I had just continued going on my own there. So, days of the early '60s.
And you say that without her even being here, so we know you're serious. All right, thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Anybody else have something to share?
Yeah, I do. I didn't think about baby pictures or around 2 years old. I have boxes full of them. I was the first grandchild, and so there's just, in fact, I was thinking I need to divide these up and give them to somebody else. But I found 2 pictures. They're a year apart, and I think this one is like 3rd grade. Third grade. And
Very cute.
so the reason why I picked that one and then this one, you can see this is 4th grade, same hairdo. Same hairdo. I was trying to think of like the third grader was still pretty innocent about things. My parents were divorced, and I was living with my mom and my stepdad and brother and sister. But I still had optimism. And this one, you can see I was just being more sophisticated. I knew the score, and they weren't putting anything over on me at this point. But but I couldn't believe that I had the same hairdo 2 years in a row. My hair was so curly that that was about the only thing they could do with it. So, but I'm looking at the 4th grader, and I'm thinking, wow, hard to believe all the things that have happened since then to me. But
Thanks, Karen.
I have no pictures of when I was young. My mom divided up all the pictures at one time and gave us each a manila envelope with all of our, and I have no idea where it is. I don't know. Some move, it got lost along with my favorite cookbook. I don't know. But so my first pictures that I have are high school pictures.
Okay.
So, it's still over 50 years ago. So this is one, I don't have many in high school either. And I don't even know why I have this picture. I know it's in my high school classroom of my journalism class. I don't even know why I know that, but it's just, so I'm probably 18, and thinking, it's just so much ahead of me. I was getting ready to go away to college. I'd gotten a scholarship at Vassar. So for this California girl, it was going way somewhere else, just a new journey, a new experience, and just life ahead of me. And really at the other end of life now, looking back as much as looking forward now, probably. But with the not being able to get my hair cut, I'm back to my high school hairdo.
You have that in common.
Yeah, yeah. But it was, that was sort of a carefree time, you don't have the same responsibilities and everything's ahead of you. And it reminded me of somewhere, and I've never been able to find this again, but I saw it online. It was a triptych of 3 pictures. And the first one is a young man on a horse, and he's looking out, and there's a castle in the distance, and he's just ready to take on life. And then in the second one, he didn't know it, but he had to go down into all these twists and turns and darkness and trees on the way to the castle. It's sort of the middle of life. And then at the end, he's an old man and he finally arrives at the castle. So my picture reminds me of that first one, on the horse and ready to go and just take life on. And there's a straight line, it looks like a straight line to the castle.
Mhm.
Then you find out it's not a straight line.
Good one. Thank you, Linda. Anybody else want to share today?
I have been super busy for the past 5 days. So it was this morning that Bill and I decided we needed to get photos. And most of you can relate. We've got a closet full of boxes of photos. And I think the ones of me when I was young is way in the back. So I'm gonna show you. Let's see if I can do this. This is a book that I made for Bill's birthday last year. So it's got a picture of me.
Oh,
Yeah, can't see it very well. Let me see. Here's one more. So, I think what Kieran said that the pictures of me younger, I would use the word naive, inexperienced,
yeah.
and just excited about life. So different than now would be, like Kieran said, full of many experiences and many happy memories, I guess.
Mhm.
Yes, young and naive, unlike now, because you're so jaded and cynical, right?
Sometimes. Yes.
You're wiser.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. I noticed Bill maybe has a little bit more hair in one of those pictures.
He did. He had beautiful wavy hair. He did. Yeah.
The waves are still there a little bit since it's been getting
Yeah.
long.
Except they're
Very
not. Sure.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll try and share one.
Okay.
This is my brother and I.
Which
You
one's
see it?
you? Are you the older one?
I'm
Or
the
the-
older one.
Uh,
That was back in Pennsylvania.
huh.
Picture.
And be nice to go back there again, do some things over. But it was a good time. And shortly after that, we moved to California.
Hmm.
And life's a blur between there and now. It just went
Yes.
by so fast.
Hmm.
And Steve, we have one picture of our son that we'd like to share with you,
Which one?
if I can find it.
Which one?
I'll show you.
Guys,
Pardon the delay. Somebody else go ahead. I'll come back with it.
Anybody else have something to share, even if you don't have a picture? Can share some reflection on what you have in common with that person or not.
oh, okay. I forgot.
Got it?
Yeah.
Got it. Here you go, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
That's our son.
Uh,
And he was
Must-
about 2 years old.
Must be a
The same
franchise.
The same pony has just lived forever, and
That can't be the same pony though.
I don't know. I have a picture of my brother on that state, only he was in Florida.
I have a picture in that manila
Magazine.
envelope.
You need to find that
Pony got
envelope.
around.
Yeah. Hmm.
that's funny. All right, well, I think this exercise, not only helps us to have a little fun, but kind of points out that, our identities change over time. The way that the people in those pictures or the people that, you have in your brain of who you used to be would answer the question, who are you, differently than you would today because of the different experiences, because of the people that you surround yourself with, because of the things that you do with your time. And so I just want us to kind of keep that in mind today as we talk about this question, who are we? But I also wanted to think about, I asked you the question about yourself, who am I? And that's kind of a different question than who are we? So I wanted to ask you to kind of reflect and share your thoughts about what is the difference between those two questions? Who am I versus who are we?
Well, as a married man, I can answer that by saying I am whatever Pat wants me to be.
I think I've been trying to think more in terms of we than I. Lately, it sort of struck me. I don't know if any of you saw the Black Church program, and there was a lot of community and the identity of being a community rather than each single person, and I think I've thought too much of myself as an I and not enough as in my mind, I think it's a difference of not that either one is good or bad, but the difference between a child of God and being part of the people of God.
Mm.
And I had a roommate in college that I don't know what we were talking about, but she ended up being peeved with me and saying that I was too damn self-sufficient. So I think, so I've had to look at that along different times in my life. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, sometimes easier to be an I than a we.
Mm.
For sure. For sure. That's what's so hard about being married.
Have
Start
more
thinking
control.
about we.
Yeah. You have more control over I than you do we, no matter who the we is.
Yeah.
But like in my situation now, I'm trying to learn how to be an I, because I've been a we for 56 years. Well, still going, still a we, but in my home, I'm just here with the dog. And so I'm really struggling with, well, what do I want to do? What, here I am at this place, and where do I go from here? What do I do now? And it's not that I'm alone. I have all my relatives are calling me all the time to see how I am and see what's going on and all that stuff. And sometimes I wish they'd just leave me alone and let me think for a little bit, and try to figure it out, because I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I lived with a roommate before I was married, but I've never been this alone before. And so it's just a whole different thing,
Yeah.
whole different mindset.
Well, that I think in some ways brings us into our question number 3, kind of how do we choose our we's, and what groups do we find ourselves in? How do we describe ourselves in relationship to our occupations or our marital status or the things we do with our time, hobbies, volunteering, things like that. And when something shifts in one of those identities, when in one of those groupings, one of those chosen we's, then that kind of brings your identity into question, because we do tend to, I think, identify ourselves in relationship to how we relate to others and how others see us, what we do with our time. So what do you think about that? How do those kinds of identifiers form our identities, and how do you think maybe some of those labels fall short of fully describing who we are and giving us a full identity?
Well, my work had a bunch of trainings as I got toward retirement to kind of help people break away from their occupation, especially if you were in a leadership role like I was. But my issue was I always felt that I was an actor in my job. I was a representative for a large utility company that I didn't always agree with everything that they did. And when I left, it was very easy for me to go from here to here. And because I never inside took myself that seriously, being the PG&E guy. I mean, I had to buy houses in certain communities to give the look for the company back in the day that, they took care of their employees and all that stuff. But I always knew it was just a role. I would be laughing because I was an extreme introvert, and I had to take a job where I had to be talking to the public and being on TV and all that stuff. So when I left after 35 years, it was that was an easy one to turn off. Marriage, being with a partner, that's a little bit different, because you're not just thinking of yourself. And I'm also on a school board, so again, I'm in a public role, but I'm again playing a role there. So I'm not the Reading School District by any means. I'm a contributor, so I've always been able to isolate myself out. But some people get caught up in those trappings and can't separate it out, and they have a very hard time.
Yeah. So Steve, how do you then describe yourself? If someone asks you to talk about who are you, because so many of us, define ourselves based on our occupations and that kind of thing.
I always just say, so a lot of people say that I'm really bright, and I always just say I'm a dim light in a very dark room. And I use a lot of self-depreciating humor. I'm a person that believes in honesty and trust and building relationships and trying to help people. And when I aim for the point that when I die, that I've done something good to make things a better place than where I was, and that I contributed to raising good people and leaving a part of me behind.
Yeah.
When my day is done, that I'll live on through people that knew me until they're all dead, and then I've done my job. I've contributed. It's just I'm not a real egotist to a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, bravo for that. I certainly fall into that trap that you were talking about with occupation. When we first moved here, I was okay because I was really busy, you know, getting us established in our new house and things like that. But you know, I certainly don't think that God causes tragedy, but in some ways, thank God for the car fire, because if I hadn't had something by that point to do outside of the house that was meaningful and took up a lot of my time, I probably would have lost my mind, because I'm not a stay home, do laundry, you know, keep the house kind of person. And I wish that I could be. You know, my house is always a disaster. You can see my kids were playing in here yesterday, so all their toys are all over the floor, and I'll get to it eventually, but I don't care, and I have better things to do with my time. And but when I don't have, you know, when I don't have occupation, when I don't have something to feel like I'm doing something meaningful for someone else in a formalized kind of way, I really struggle.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I'm in limbo, you know. I get handed a form and they, you know, are you married, single, widow, you know, what? I mean, it's like, where do you fit right now? You know, you have a husband, but he's not here, but he is here.
Yeah.
And it's just a weird place. And it's stopping me from thinking about what is my status. You know, I am married, and I'm hanging on to that. But it's just a weird thing. And I was like you, Katie, when my kids were growing up, I had to go to work. You know, people would say back then, oh, you don't have to work. Your husband makes a lot of money. You don't have to work. But I did. I had to work for me, you know, to be who I was. And so I always felt like I developed that part of me separate from my family in a way. I was a different person when I was at work than I was when I was at home.
Interesting.
And I look back at my life at different stages, and I think sometimes, who was that person and why did she say that? You know, because I haven't always been very nice, and so to other people, and so at least in my view, other people don't see me that way sometimes, but I do. I think I could have been a lot nicer and more Christian. And so that always bothers me. If talk about the do-overs bill, if you had the chance to go back and do some things over, would you do it? Sometimes I think yes, and other times I think it's better to leave it alone, because it all turned out right, you know. It bothers me sometimes thinking about my life being segmented with these different people that I was.
Mm.
And you move through this stage and then you don't ever go back to it. I mean, you can't go back to it, but you just have to have that faith that what's coming is good.
Mm. Who else?
You've given me so much to think about. I just feel like I don't even know where to start. I just probably throw it all up. And I think all my pictures are probably in a storage shed where they've been since I left the house after Brian died. So I haven't gone back there. So yeah, there's just a, yeah. It's funny, if somebody asked me, like yesterday, someone asked me if I was the minister of our church, and I said, no, I'm just a person. And she caught me on that one, but that's kind of what I usually say. But if I'm not doing something, I don't feel like I'm being a part of life, what I should be doing. So that's how I get to be an officer here and there or whatever. So
Mm-hmm. So what we do with our time often tells us who we are. All right, well, let's move into some of the text here. We've certainly got a lot swirling around in terms of where our identities come from and comparing past identities with current identities and how those impact each other. But that fourth journal question was about our Christian identity. How does the fact that we are Christians affect our identity? And I think that that's not a separate question. I think it's something that is just kind of a whole other layer to add on top of this conversation that we've been having. So for today, we're just going to take a look at the very beginning of 1 Peter again. We talked about this a little bit, part of it last week, verses 1 and 2. This time I'd like us to go for verses 1 through 5. And in order to think about this relationship between the past and the present, and some of you even mentioned the future, I want to take a look at this passage from a grammatical position. I know that sounds kind of boring, but I think it will be helpful for us. I'm going to share the passage with you here on the screen, which I know I don't tend to do because I like to hear what your passages say. And certainly I would love, especially if you've got different verb tenses going, I'd love to hear as we go through this, what the differences are. But here is 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 from the NRSV translation. And I'll read the whole thing just so we have a sense of, the message. And then what I'd like us to do is go through and find all the verbs. And we're going to talk about what the verb tense tells us about who the people are that are being described. So 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who have been chosen and destined by God the Father and sanctified by the Spirit to be obedient to Jesus Christ and to be sprinkled with his blood. May grace and peace be yours in abundance. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. By his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who are being protected by the power of God through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. So this is not Paul, but it's definitely got the Paul vibe. He likes to write in very run-on, complicated sentences, and verses 3 through 5 are all one long sentence, but we've got a lot of different actions, a lot of different verbs going on in here. So who, if you remember any of this, I'm not going to make you graph out the sentences or anything like that. But let's start at the beginning and find some verbs here. Who sees a verb that we can lift up?
Have been chosen.
Have been chosen. If I take my little pen here and underline this, can you see that?
Uh-huh.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. All right. So I can do that as we go through. And then we've also got destined as kind of part of that same same verb. All right, so have been chosen and destined. So anybody remember way back to school days what kind of verb this is? This is one of those complicated ones.
What tense?
I had to look it up because
Perfect.
I couldn't remember. What's
Is it
that?
Past perfect.
Close. So this is the past perfect progressive. And that's because of that been. So past perfect is had and then the word. So that would be in the case of this particular one, it would be had chosen. But this one is have been chosen. And so that one is a progressive because it has the been in it, and have, it has have rather than had. And that's important because the have is a present verb, right? Have, I currently have, rather than had, which is a past verb. And so this is the present perfect progressive tense. And this is, you know, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here or some other, you know, metaphor, but this is important, I think, because the present perfect progressive tells us that an action that began in the past continues in the present and will probably even continue into the future. So when you use the present perfect progressive tense, you are suggesting that past actions are continuing to happen and will continue to happen into the future. And so when we're
They
talking
better add
about,
sanctified then.
yes, yeah, that one goes with that too. So these verbs, chosen, destined, sanctified, these are things that the author is trying to express occurred in the past, but are continuing to occur in the present and will continue to occur in the future. So if we're talking about people who are experiencing a lot of upheaval in their lives, a lot of things are changing, you know, they certainly have not always been Christians. And so even just the fact that they are Christians now and are behaving differently and choosing to live their lives differently brings a lot of upheaval to their lives and a lot of feelings perhaps of turmoil. And, you know, they don't have a whole lot of consistency and stability to cling to. And so the very first sentence, the very first verbs that describe these people in this letter are reminding them that these things have been true of you all along, that they were true of you in the past, they are true of you now, and they will continue to be true of you moving forward. Marge, you're shaking your head.
Wait a second. Well, that's interesting because they are new Christians.
Mhm.
And I didn't think of it as them being chosen in the past.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's an interesting kind of conversation to have, I think, there, because you know, what is our identity? Is our identity who we think we are now, or is our identity formed by God outside of time? That God chose us before we even knew. God destined us before we even knew. God fulfilled our sanctification before it even started in our, you know, in our, from our perspective. Isn't that an interesting way that this particular verb form, you know, provides to us?
It's kind of is, was, and ever shall be.
Yeah. And this is, you know, the Presbyterians kind of really lean into this with their predestination and their very heavy emphasis on that who I am is now, has always been, and always will be the identity that God gave me before time began, before I was even thought of by anyone on earth. God knew who I was going to be. And then from God's perspective, I am that. I have always been that. I will never be anything else.
So then if you want to grow and change, does that mean you're growing into what God destined you to be?
Yes. From the Presbyterian perspective, you don't really have a choice in the matter. You're always going to be that. And even if you think you're making your own choices, you're really not. And so sometime we could talk about that. I have a really good lesson on providence that we could do sometime if you're interested in that. but for hardcore Presbyterians, yes, you do not have your own will. You only do what God has already predestined for you to do. Even if you think that you're making your own choices, you're not. But I don't think you have to interpret this that strongly. I think the idea that your fundamental identity is what what I want to emphasize here. That for these people who are experiencing all this upheaval in their lives, their identity is not, they are not criminals. They are not people who are wishy-washy in what they believe and how they behave in their lives. This is consistent because God gave them this identity. Who you are is fundamentally who you are deep down, and that is people who have been chosen, destined, and sanctified for obedience to Jesus Christ. So I think that is, that's powerful. Any other comments on these particular verbs? We could keep going.
So not being as Presbyterian, we might say it's more what God intends us to be.
Possibly, or I think that there's a difference to me. So I didn't grow up Presbyterian. I spent my most formative years in terms of my theological education as a Presbyterian. And so I do have a predestination theology that I believe in, but to me, it's not so much, God knows the next word I'm going to say, God knows what color I'm going to paint my wall. That stuff doesn't matter. But the fundamental, who I am at my core, kind of the purpose that I have in my life, the bigger picture is kind of where God has formed me and made me to be who I am. And again, that would kind of be part of that Providence class, and talking about vocation and who we're created to be and what we're created to do in the world brings us meaning and gives us joy, because doing those things helps us to live into our identity in God. And so that's kind of how I see it. I'm sure that there are people who don't believe in any kind of predestination and everything is completely random. But in terms of this context that we're looking at here, I think these people are looking for some of that reassurance. And so they're not going to balk so much as we Americans do at the idea that you are destined and chosen. They're not going to be so interested in, hey, I don't want to be controlled. I want to make my own choices. They're interested in, I'm not alone. Someone has their finger on the pulse of this, and who I am at my core is not shaken, despite everything that else is shaking in my life. So that's what I would say is fundamental here.
But if people are people make choices and decisions in their life, and you can feel like you're being led in the right way, like God is in control and is leading you where you're supposed to be, that you are where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to do. But then there are people who make the wrong choices and, end up as drug addicts or in prison or in some other really terrible situation. If you go by predestination, does that mean that God knew they were going to do that, and that was his plan for them?
Yeah, if you're fully into that, whole thing, and every single thing that happens is God's plan, then yes. And I don't buy into that. I don't buy into the idea that God creates drug addicts, God creates fire disasters, God creates tsunamis for the purpose of having all the things happen to you that God has created for it to happen to you. So it's a very complicated, and there's definitely a large spectrum in terms of understanding what that means. And I'd be happy to talk about it a lot more if y'all are interested in that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so let's move on to our next verb here, or set of verbs, I guess. We have, change my color.
Different verbs.
So we have, oh, that didn't change. No,
Different shade of the same red.
Yeah, it's
There we
green
go.
up there.
so we have some infinitives.
Mhm.
To be. So what, when we're talking about tense, if we're talking about, how this applies to past, present, or future, what does this seem to indicate for you?
What you'll do in the future.
Okay, future.
Future, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got some kind of future ideas about, who you are going to be because of what has taken place in the past, continues in the present, and will continue in the future. So some reassurance that the people are not alone in this, that this is what they are called to do, to be obedient and to be sprinkled with the blood of Christ. But they aren't in it alone, because they've already been and continue to be chosen, destined, and sanctified by God for this purpose. And so God is with them. God is continuing over and over, every day, every hour, every minute, to choose you, to destine you, to sanctify you, to provide for you, to be able to behave in these ways, despite the troubles, despite the problems that you encounter, despite the persecution that you're undergoing. So powerful first sentence in terms of content and meaning, even just in the way that the very first sentence, and this is just the address, this is just the dear recipient of this letter. Dear sir.
So Katie, I'm an exile. How would I interpret to be sprinkled with his blood?
Okay. Interesting.
Physically.
Yeah. Interesting question. So what does that mean?
Isn't that answered in the next phrase?
To receive the grace and peace.
In abundance.
So that's what that can mean, that to be sprinkled with his blood. Being sprinkled with his blood means receiving that grace and peace.
Full of there.
Yeah, so that could.
My notes.
All the above, may this be yours in the future.
Mm-hmm. What do you have, Linda?
The notes say this recalls the blood of the covenant or the water sprinkled for purification from the Old Testament.
Yeah, so interesting, because these are not Jews, at least we assume, who are receiving this letter. And so does that phrase really even mean anything to them, to be sprinkled with his blood? I mean, it's possible that, whoever this person is, our Peter, so to speak, was there with them and, taught them some of these phrases and taught them some of this history, so that does mean something to them. But in terms of culture, these people would not have grown up with the idea that, sprinkling something with blood would purify, would cleanse, would kind of expiate sin in the way that people who grew up in Israel or in Jewish communities in the diaspora would.
But on the other hand, I understand that it's our generation that takes things more literally. And in the past, they were more open to metaphor and symbolism.
Yeah. So the sprinkling could be a metaphorical kind of idea. Certainly, we're not talking literally Jesus blood, obviously, here at this point. Jesus has already been raised and ascended. So we've got to have some kind of this needs to be figurative in some way. But, you know, what does it mean to be sprinkled with the blood of Christ? I think it could have to do with that purification and the rituals that, you know, kind of a callback to the rituals of the Old Testament. It could be kind of washed, you know, washed to be purified, but it could also be, you know, to kind of receive the Spirit, to be reminded of those things that have taken place in the past, continue to take place, and will continue to take place in the future. You know, we have so many different ways of understanding baptism. Baptism is purification of sins. Baptism is welcoming into the family of God. Baptism is, you know, communing with God, having God's presence with you. The dove descending upon Jesus in his baptism kind of represents that one. And so if we're talking about sprinkling, all of those things could be, you know, could be the case. So it could be a reminder of Christ's presence with them. It could be a reminder that Christ has purified them and brought them to this place where they are capable of that obedience. Or it could be just a reminder that all of you have undergone this ritual, and therefore you're a part of a community, and so you're not alone. You have each other. You have that bond with each other because you've all been sprinkled with the blood, and so you're all part of that we identity. All those things could be true all at the same time. All right, let's pick up the pace here a little bit. So we've got, may grace and peace be yours in abundance. Those are looking for my information here. Oh my gosh, did I not write that one down? That was so important. Not the imperative, but the modal. That's right, modal verb.
Never heard of that one.
Never heard of that.
You're just making stuff up now.
So a modal verb is using the word may to express possibility. And so the purpose there is to express the possibility is that something is true, to request, you know, we sometimes use may I do something, to ask for permission. But in this case, I think we've also got a bit of that imperative kind of thing, that it's, by saying it, we are kind of hoping it is true, or reminding people that it already is true, because we know that this is true. We know that God has already accomplished this, and that nobody needs to worry that they don't have grace and peace and abundance, because God has already given it. That one's not too difficult. All right, now we've got our standard. Ooh, that's a good one. Imperative. Blessed be. And now we get into what Pam was talking about, the perfect, the present perfect has given. What else do I have here for colors? And that one is all of this. has given a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who are being protected by the power of God. So the whole rest of this hinges on this has given and the new birth. And this is the nature of the new birth that has been given to us. So again, we have the that perfect tense, and the present perfect describes an action that began in the past again and continues into the present. So it occurred at a particular point in the past and continues in the present. And so it uses has or have. So again, kind of similar to what we had before, the have been chosen has given us a new birth. So that is something that has occurred, but continues to have implications now, all of this. And now we get a participle. Who are being protected. You who are being protected. So what is that one?
You're going too far back for me.
Yes, present now.
Yeah, so present participle.
Present.
Yes, present participle. So we have progressive or continuous, again, that ongoing sense. So we are being protected. It's an ongoing action. It's something that is occurring in the present, but isn't just for a moment. It's an ongoing action.
Interesting.
And then finally, I'll go back to our green because we've got another infinitive to be revealed. So then we already said that was kind of a future thing. So other comments on this little exercise? Was that interesting to you? I thought it was interesting to study some of this and look really in depth at some of it, and thinking about, how does this impact somebody's identity when they're told that you have been chosen for these behaviors, that God has given you this new birth, you are in an ongoing sense, you're being protected. So yeah, the things that are happening to you look horrible and it feels perhaps like God has abandoned you, but you are being protected. It is an ongoing action that is currently true in the present. And so how do, that is a complete reinterpretation of what's happening to these people. They're on the face of it, they're not being protected, right? But they are being reassured here in the very beginning of this book that part of their identity is that they are being protected. They are people who are under the protection of God, even now as they undergo this persecution.
Thank you, Katie. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Pam, really quick before you go. Next week, I am very excited to announce that I'm getting my first COVID shot. Woohoo! But it was scheduled for 12:15. And so would we be able to start at 10:45 next week, just so that we can make sure we don't get cut short? Because I'll have to leave a little early so I can get out to that. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
That's good with you? Okay. All right, great. So we'll see you at 10:45 next week, and I'll remind you of that in the email.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye, Pam. So he's writing this letter telling them they're protected, but meanwhile, they're all being massacred by the...
Yeah. So isn't that a challenge to kind of the obvious interpretation on the face of it? And this kind of, I think, in some ways takes us back to our Daniel class, that it looks like, from all evidence suggests, that our God has been defeated, that our God is not present in our lives, that our God is has abandoned us because we're undergoing these horrible experiences and persecutions, and whatever that looks like, whether people are just making fun of us on the street, or if we are being physically persecuted by the state, taken into custody, tried, and summarily executed. Anything negative like that might indicate that God is not on your side. And so this is a huge challenge to, what we would today call the prosperity gospel. And at the time, and it has been a question forever. I mean, think about Job. The questions there were, that if the things that are going well in your life are going well, that must mean that God, what you're doing is good and God loves you and God is blessing you. But if things start going bad for you, that must mean that you are not faithful, that you're doing something wrong, that God is punishing you. And so that's been going on forever. That idea. Today people say, oh, well, because I'm wealthy and because God wants me to be successful, God wants me to be wealthy, God wants me to have this huge house, God wants me to have this jet so that I can go anywhere I want to go in the world. And there are whole churches built around this idea. And it makes sense because that's what people want to hear. They want to hear that that's what God wants for them, and that they are blessed because of God. And they feel that they can live into that. But as Lutherans, we are called to take up our cross. We believe not in the prosperity gospel, but in the way of the cross. And so what we believe is that despite all appearances, God is with us, not when we have yachts and fancy pools and mansions and yeah, maybe we should leave the Lutheran church and go elsewhere, huh, Marge? But when we are undergoing suffering, when our lives look more like the life of Jesus, when we suffer because of our faith, because of what we do to serve others and to show God's love for the oppressed, that is when we are blessed. That is the proof that we are being protected. And so it's upside down. It doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you're inside. And then when you experience this, when you receive that chosenness, that sanctification, then that's when you can know that these things are true despite the appearances to the world.
I think what's being protected is our salvation more than what's actually happening to us. You're talking a lot of future in there about hope and inheritance.
Mm-hmm. So our future salvation, our
ready to be revealed, that's being protected for us.
Our permanent situation, perhaps.
Yeah, that we live in that, in the now, even though it's still coming.
Yeah. But I would say too, I would read into this that part of what's being protected too is that identity. That, our bodies might be at risk here, our lives might be at risk here, our possessions might be at risk here, our societal status might be at risk here. But what isn't at risk is God's love for us, our eternal destination, and very fundamentally and importantly, our identity, who God created us to be, who we are at the core is being protected. And that can't change because God has control of that. And so that, I think, has more, to me, that gives me more hope for now than some promise of what will happen to me after I die. That when you're in the midst of it and you are looking for that stability, you are looking for that hope, you are looking for that reassurance. It's not just that, my reward will be great later after I undergo all this torture, but that at the core of it, I can lean on knowing that who I am is not at risk. And I feel like that, at least to me, that's important. All right. Any other comments, questions, disagreements?
I'm thinking about that, what you just said, but that is very reassuring, to understand, not from a predestination point of view, but from I'm God's child and he's with me through all of it, through everything. And not that it's been decided this way or that way, but he hasn't abandoned me. That's really important for me. And he's not gonna.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions or closing thoughts?
Oh, you made me know why I'm not an English major.
I think they invented some of those terms after I was in school.
I like that, Karen. That's good.
It's amazing to me. A lot of this stuff, you don't really pay attention to it when you're learning it as a kid, but I got really into all of these types of things when I took Greek and Hebrew in seminary, because you have to learn all these different tenses in order to understand the verbs when you're reading in those languages, and so that you can translate them properly and get the right grade on your test. And so we had to have a lesson on what's a participle, because most of the class didn't know in English what a participle was, let alone a Greek participle with all the different weird endings that it can have. So it's
and it makes you wonder how true the translations are to all those tenses. And
and they're all in there when you go through to,
because I'm sure there's some wiggle room on what direction you can go with your translation.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that was a good lesson as far as I'm concerned. I get into this stuff because I'm a little geeky. I promise next week we're not going to have more grammar lessons. Maybe next week we'll do math word problems or something like that. No. So this week, in addition to the, let me move over to this. In addition to the journal questions, if you have the time, because it's been a while since we started this class, I would encourage you to go back and reread the book, read the whole thing again like we did the first week, and try to pay attention to some of those phrases or verses that talk about identity, and think about some of those verbs and how they might impact the way that this audience received it, and the way that we can receive it as well, in terms of what it might provide and how it might describe who we are. Because who we are is the core, is kind of the foundation of what we should do, which is what we're going to talk about next week. So next week, the question is, what should we do? And I want you to think a little bit about your behavior, the way that you live your life. How is your life different because you're a Christian? What might it look, if it's easier for you, think about if you weren't a Christian, what would your life look like? Or because you are a Christian, what's different in your life? And then I want you to think a little bit about, how we might connect in a more literal way with these people. Have you ever been persecuted for your faith? Have you ever experienced some kind of negative consequence because of something that you did because of your faith? And I don't just mean, you said I was to someone and so they treated you badly or hit you or something. I mean, also, situations where you chose to do something because of your faith, and it had negative consequences because somebody didn't understand why you were doing something like that might be. And then think about, what is the church? That's a really big question. I've got probably 6 or 7 books on my shelf asking that question and trying to answer it. So no need to write a whole dissertation on it, but just think a little bit about, to you, how would you explain what the church is? And I think that will help us to get into our conversations for next week. So any questions on any of that? All right, very good. Well, thanks everybody for another great conversation, and we will be back again next week.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks for showing me all your baby pictures. That was fun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Good week.